Can the bonds we have with our loved ones go beyond this plane and into the next? Can we feel those connections so strongly that we know when someone we care about is in trouble or is dying? And how do those connections persist throughout generations? Today we speak with Kelly, an author and podcaster who has a myriad of experiences about these connections and their effects on the living. Her stories are both spooky and uplifting, and we know you're going to enjoy them. Today on Homespun Haints. Hello, Hainted Loves. Welcome to Homespun Haints. I'm Becky.
I'm Diana.
Oh, come on, Diana.
That's how I feel today.
Well, you know what? After you listen to this episode today, you're going to perk right up because we are talking to Kelly, who is an author. She has several books under her belt, and she also has a podcast called Let's Deconstruct a Story.
I like story podcasts.
She talks about short stories, and then she interviews the author of that short story. It's a really, really cool thing to listen to if you're literary nerds like us, or if you just like stories like we do.
That's very true.
We're going to let her talk a little bit more about that when she comes on. But before we do, I need to think of something funny to perk Diana up.
Perk me up, Becky. Perk me up like a cold nipple.
I wish you could see her right now. She looks like a rose like a week after Mother's Day where it's like,
I am wilted.
She's wilted.
It's true.
It looks like we might actually make our goal for our 100 patrons by September 1st because we just got a new one.
Woo! Who is it? Literally, like just now? Like this moment?
Like just now.
Ooh.
Rachel just joined our Patreon.
Well, Rachel, welcome to the fold in real time.
Thank you so much. This is
you
like
won't
perfect
hear this
timing.
till later, but we're appreciating you immediately.
We certainly are, yes. And our goal is to get to 100 patrons by September 1st so I can come to Tulsa and open up the sinister secret passageway in Diana's basement to see what lies beneath. You know, it's probably going to be full of worms because...
Worms?
Well, let me tell you something. Okay, so I have this luck thing. Or bad luck thing. I don't know. You know how people have angel numbers? They always see the same number.
Yes.
Or they have signs from their spirit guides. They see cardinals or doves or something like that. Well, for me, thank God it's not happening anymore. Or at least I thought it had stopped. It's worms.
I remember this story about worms.
Yeah, we have talked about this before. Yes.
Becky's spirit animal.
That's the grossest thing. If I'm sitting outside eating al fresco, a worm will fall on my head.
A worm will fall on your head. What is it doing above you?
And a tree? I don't know. You're eating
like
outside.
Like a bagworm? Like a silkworm?
I don't know. I just know it's a worm. It used to be that every time I ordered food in a restaurant, there would be a worm on it. And I don't care how fancy the restaurant. This happened in like the Hilton once. I ordered waffles and there were worms on my waffles. What? I'll get fish. I'll cut open the fish. It'll be full of worms. The most recent time this happened, though, was in 2014. So it's been a while. I was at a Seder and they were passing around the parsley for us to dip in the salt water. And I was just, it's like I knew it before it even happened. I was like, my parsley's going to have a grub on it. And sure enough, I pull it out and there's a worm. On my parsley. And then every house we had would just be infested. And finally, I don't know what I did. Maybe it's because I got more spiritual, more in touch with my little worm side or something. Maybe it's because I started spending more time gardening and I'm really bad at it. And the worms were like, oh, we got to get the fuck away from this one. So I don't know what I managed to do, but somehow I broke the worm curse.
You slithered away from it.
That's my slither sound.
You wriggled out of that curse. Nice.
Well, last week I kept seeing worms all over my house.
No.
Inside these little black strings.
Inside?
All over the place. And of course, I'm like, oh no, I thought we were done with this. Universe, what do you want from me? Do I need to kill another plant? How can you I'm not a worm person. It's just, oh yeah, I even forgot. Like, remember when we were talking about hallucinations on that Patreon episode? And that was a hallucination I had, was a giant worm.
Your giant worm.
Yeah, like a sandworm, but in my school. So what is it about me and worms? I don't even like them. They're like, I don't like things without spines. You pick it up and it becomes with two brains, two anuses. I don't like them.
They have a lot of hearts, don't they? Some worms.
Yes, probably. And I'm sure some have a lot of teeth.
Ew.
I saw all of these things all over the floor. And I was like, dang it. And every time I turned around, I would see another one. And I was like, dang it. And finally, because, my typical policy for things like this is just to ignore it. A normal person would pick it up. But I was like...
Eventually cats eat it, right?
Right. But, you don't want them eating because sometimes those worms have parasites and stuff. You don't want your cats getting sick.
That's true.
So after about a week of this, I finally was like, all right, I'm just going to pick all of these up. Turns out they weren't worms at all.
Uh-oh.
So I had this crazy idea that I'd been saving up all of my old jeans because they get holes in them and stuff. And I was like, I'm just going to cut them up and make a giant denim skirt out of them.
A giant denim skirt? Like a Pentecostal giant denim skirt?
Like a maxi skirt. So it's going to take several, especially some of these like old skinny jeans. You just take a bunch of different pant legs and sew them together and make like a nice A-line maxi skirt.
Ooh, you could cut them out so that the hem at the bottom of the skirt is all the waistbands and belt loops and pockets. So all the pockets are upside down, like around the edge of the skirt and the zippers.
So I was doing that. I was cutting out all of these pieces of denim, and I am not a very organized person, so I was doing this wherever I was in the house where I felt like doing it, in the bedroom, in the living. It was most of the things I saw, they were actually just dark threads that had fallen out while I was cutting the denim.
Good thing the cats didn't eat that then.
No. And then there were three that weren't. Three that weren't.
What were the outliers?
Well, one was a piece of wire.
Yeek. Not good for cat eating either.
No, I'm glad I got that one up. One was a roach leg. Just the leg.
Of course it was. Just the leg.
Yeah.
The cat already got the rest of that one.
Yeah. And the last one was a bit of a cat turd that had fallen up and gotten wrapped in hair. When the cat's constipated, if you have a long-haired cat, you know what this is like,
It was turd-encrusted cat hair that had dried to a fossil, basically.
Yes.
Hiding amongst the denim worms, innocently. Just long enough that you started to pick it up with your bare hands, right? Like, oh, it's just denim.
No, because I thought all of these were worms to begin with, so I was going around with a Sani wipe, picking them up, thankfully.
Oh, okay.
Thankfully, yeah. So I came to two conclusions after this experience. A, I need better glasses.
Yeah.
And B, I can't really sew, because you should have seen this monstrosity that I tried to make.
We'd like to thank our sponsors, Singer and Zenny, for sponsoring this episode. It's just kidding. No, you can, though, if you want to. Here's our website, homespunhaints.com.
Actually, I have a brother.
I have a Singer. Either one. Whoever wants to sponsor can reach out.
Anyway, so a bunch of cut up jeans legs that were still kind of pinned together haphazardly went in the trash can, as did a bunch of quote unquote worms. And I got on Amazon and ordered myself a maxi denim skirt for $20. I tried really hard. I tried.
Just watch. You're going to open that package up and guess what? Worms!
No, I'm wearing...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, see? It's kind of cute.
Oh, that's cute. It's not excessively Pentecostal.
No, it's not. It's not. Well, it does kind of drag the ground, and I have to pull it up to my armpits because I'm really short. Check this out. It's like literally up to my bra. Thankfully, none of you can see this, but I literally have like my skirt all the way up to my ribs, and it still drags the ground.
Hilarious.
And if I trusted myself enough, I would actually cut it and hem it, but I'm afraid I'd end up with another worm infestation if I did that. So we're just going to suffer.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice skirt, Becky. I like your nice skirt.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was a whole lot easier than making it myself. I don't know what the hell I was thinking.
Most things are.
I have literally been saving beat up jeans for months for this project. And all it took was about 3 hours in the fear of a worm infestation before I was like, nope.
Never mind.
We are not that crafty.
I guess someday I might make you a skirt out of old jeans.
Oh, that would be delightful. So, well, Hainted Loves, I think we learned a few things today about
Did we?
sewing and worms.
Worms.
Do you have an animal that you don't want that constantly follows you around?
Do I?
Do worms even count as an animal? What is your angel sign? Is it something you'd rather not have around?
That's a good question. I don't really have a spirit animal besides just the humble house cat. Just kidding. Cats aren't humble at all. But I think everybody's cat likes me.
But do you find cats in places you shouldn't find cats, like your meal?
Sometimes. I find parts of cats and things that aren't supposed to be there.
Okay, all right, we're going to move on from that. I don't want to hear
Just
the rest
the
of the
hair.
Oh,
The hair.
okay. Gosh, don't say that. Yeah, we all have found cat hair in the nooks and crannies of our own bodies. It's true.
Yeah, I just got done cat sitting.
Well, Tainted Loves, if you have an unwanted angel animal or sign or something, let us know, because we're curious. I always called it my worm curse. I'd like to know if I'm the only one.
Cursed by worms. Cursed with worms.
Just don't like them. Otherwise, my worm curse has been gone. I'm making an appointment to see the ophthalmologist, and we are getting close to our goal, so I may be coming out to Tulsa. I may have new glasses when I come out there. We'll see. We'll see how fast
Let's hope so if you drive.
I'm flying. Are you kidding? We want to give another thanks to Rachel for becoming our patron. We are very close. Hopefully, we can make it out to Tulsa next month. And if you are not a member of our Patreon...
What are you doing with your life? Watching commercials?
Boom. Today, we are thrilled to bring on Kelly Fordon. She is the host of the podcast, Let's Deconstruct a Story. She also writes herself. She has 2 books out, collections of short stories. And as you can imagine, since she's on this show, she is a very haunted lady. She has ghost stories to share with us. Kelly, thank you so much for being on the show with us today. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so fun to be here.
So tell us a little bit about Let's Deconstruct a Story.
Let's Deconstruct a Story is a podcast for the story nerds, is what I call it. It started as an idea. A friend of mine, Wendy Rawlings, maybe like 20 years ago, she just happened to mention that she was deconstructing a story, and I thought it was such a cool term. And I decided that the best way to learn about short stories is to talk to the people who write them. So every month we pick a short story, do a deep dive into the short story, and then I talk to the writer on the podcast about the story, the process, and how long it took, point of view, and all that stuff. It's really fun.
Do people remember writing story? I don't know. Whenever I write fiction, it just comes out and then it's gone. I cannot remember what I did. I read it years later and I'm like, I wrote that? Huh?
Well, it is kind of weird. Yeah, I have to warn people what story we're reading of theirs, and then I think they have to reread it.
I thought so.
What was that?
Yeah.
Every time someone comes on, I think they remember like one key element that really helps. Like Jason Ackert is a writer who's going to be on September 1st, and I just interviewed him on Sunday, and the one thing that I thought was really cool that he remembered is all of his characters have very strange names, and this story was surreal. And he said, I had to have strange names because you can't have like Bob and Fred entering another dimension. You know?
I know a lot of people are familiar with the structure of a short story because we learned it in our high school English classes, starting with the introduction, and now they call it something else, but I always called it the narrative hook and rising up to the climax and all of that. Do most short stories still follow that pattern?
I don't think they do. A lot of people are trying different plot points, I think, because we get tired of the same thing all the time. And so they'll enter a short story closer to the action or in medias res. I think of a short story as sort of a point in time or a pivotal moment in a person's life, a significant thing that happens to someone. So car accident or whatever, and the fallout from that. Actually, I've not found in the 3 years that I've been doing this that anyone is following that Freytag's pyramid. I think that's probably what you were talking about. Like, yeah, or Freytag, or however you say it. Yeah, nobody actually talks about that. They talk more about point of view as a big one, because do you want to tell the story from the first person point of view, from the person's point of view, or you want to tell it from an omniscient narrator or third person? That seems to be a bigger discussion topic for a lot of people. And as you know from like telling ghost stories, it matters whether you trust the narrator or not.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a big part of it. Do we have an unreliable narrator?
Another thing that I notice that are different about ghost stories or horror stories versus, I guess, that traditional pyramid is a lot of times ghost stories never have any sort of resolution.
Right.
It ends at that climax. If you are going to follow that sort of pyramid, it's like, and it's like, well, why? Nobody knows.
Right? Because you can't solve it. You can't solve it. A lot of short stories end that way too. I think that now we're much happier if the main character has like just a moment of either realization or redemption, or they fall apart, and you can sort of leave them like that.
Yes.
You know? A slice of life.
What are the names of the collections of stories that you have out?
The first one is Garden for the Blind, and that came out in 2015, and that's actually more of a novel and stories. But Wayne State University Press doesn't do novels, so they call it a link collection, I think. And then the second one is an actual short story collection called I Have the Answer. And it was sort of facetious, the name, and then it came out in April of 2020. So like, can you imagine in the beginning of the pandemic, this book comes out called I Have the Answer. Oops. It was like, it just wasn't that funny.
Did it help sales?
No, not particularly. I think people were like, what is your problem? Shut up. Yeah. That was a tough time to launch a book, for sure.
Yeah. All of these books are available. Are they available at bookstores?
Wayne State University Press has a website. They're also available on Amazon. It's a small university press. So independent bookstores, definitely in Michigan, for sure.
And if you go to a bookstore, I'm sure you can request this title.
Oh, for sure.
Just a little nudge out there for everybody who's listening.
Thank you very much.
So you have your own personal nonfiction experience that you would like to tell us about.
Yeah. So my father was 43 when he had me. He married late. And so even though I was born in 67, he was 43. And so when he died, I was only 34 years old, and I was an only child, and we were really, really close. I come from an Irish background, so he had been telling me Irish ghost stories my whole life, but I didn't expect to live one. He died in April of 2002, and I was pregnant with my fourth child. I immediately had the terrible back problem. I couldn't move. I was just like devastated. And I was just wandering around in a complete fog. You know how you are when you've lost someone so close. I went to his house, which was on Lake Erie, about 6 weeks later. And I was sitting out on the deck. And I was just thinking like, gosh, Dad, I wonder what happened to you. I wonder where you are. And this voice in my head, and I would say was sort of like the voice we always have in our head, like get the mail, but was like this voice that said, we're all up here, we're all having a great time, everybody's here together. And then a long string of names came out. My grandmother's name, my aunt's name, some other names, his good friends. I was thinking the whole time, well, I'm just answering myself. I'm just making this up. I was Catholic at the time. I'm not Catholic anymore, but you know, the Catholic thing, like we're in heaven. At the end of the long list of names was this name. It was Creighton. Creighton was my dad's best friend. Well, Creighton was alive. Creighton had spoken at my dad's funeral. So the minute that Creighton's name came up, I was like, oh God, I'm totally making this up. I'm going insane. Grief has driven me mad. But then this voice got more insistent and was like, no, Creighton's here, Creighton's here, Creighton's here. And it was like getting louder. And so I did freak out then. Then I was like, this isn't me. I ran up to the house, turned on the TV, just sat there trying to calm down a little bit. The phone rang, and I picked up the phone, and this woman said, "Is Peggy there?" And Peggy's my mom. She was upstairs taking a shower, so I said, "Yeah, she's here, but she's in the shower. Can I take a message?" And she said, "Well, I just wanted to tell you this is Creighton, secretary, and we just wanted to let you know that he has passed away." And I was like, what? He was a bachelor. He had passed away in his apartment. He'd been dead, I guess, a couple days, sadly, before they found him. So I was like, oh my God. But the feeling that I had was like, oh my God, it's true. Like he's somewhere out there. So I went running upstairs to my mom's. I burst into the room and I was like, "Mom, guess what? Creighton's dead." I was like so excited. And that's terrible. I mean, he was an older man and I did not want him to die or whatever, but I was so excited that it was unbelievable. And she goes, "What the heck are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I knew he was dead." So it was just really cool. And what was cool about it for me was, even though I'm no longer religious, I'm no longer Catholic, I'm whatever, I still believe he was somewhere. And like, I got this message and it's my own little belief. And it has stayed with me all these years. It's been like 20 years. And I just think it was a way to soothe me so that I wouldn't have a complete breakdown, because there I was pregnant with my fourth kid. And I just felt it was so comforting.
Have you had other messages from beyond, I guess, for lack of a better word?
So that was about 6 weeks after he died. Leading up to that, the car locks on my Dodge Durango, I had a Dodge Durango at the time, would go up and down by themselves after he died. For weeks afterwards, they would just go out of the blue. And after that message, it never happened again.
Oh.
And then I read a cool thing. Now, I'm not Buddhist either, but I read that the Buddhists believe that people hang around for 6 weeks. I think there's an actual day. It's like 40 days or 42 days. I should have looked it up before I came on. But I then went back and checked, what day would this have been that I talked to my dad? And it was before the cutoff date. And I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. Maybe they get to hang around for a little bit, tell you they're all right, and then take off to wherever.
What a pleasant thing to believe. I want to believe that.
It's just nice, right?
We all get 6 weeks to haunt, like a goodbye tour. Right?
Exactly. I'm just going to take it with me.
That's awesome.
Right.
That. With the door locks, so these are automatic, they weren't manual?
Right. They were automatic. Yeah.
Okay. We hear a lot of stories about ghosts interfering with electronics. There's a belief that they're able to sort of draw energy, which is why lights sometimes flicker, or the heating and cooling system might be messed with, or your phone battery might get drained if there's ghosts around. So yeah, there's a lot of lore surrounding that.
Yeah.
Yes.
It is really comforting. I mean, obviously none of us knows. We can't finish the story, but it's a comforting thought that someone could reach out and tell you they were okay.
Right. 6 weeks of haunting. That's all I need.
I love it. That actually is quite comforting, because I know a lot of people, when they get messages from loved ones after death, they're always like, oh no, does that mean they're stuck? So we're going to have to remember this.
Right. Yeah, I guess because I never heard from him again. He went somewhere else, hopefully. And since he said he was having a good time, I hope that kept up afterwards. But he did tell me a ghost story too. So I told you he was Irish. My dad was born in 1924 and he was in World War II. And when he was growing up, he lost 4 of his 6 siblings. They were really devout Irish Catholics because basically I think they needed to hold on to that. When he was in high school, his younger sister had already died of rheumatic fever, and he went off to Culver Military Academy. He was very close with his older sister. Her name was Loretta. So he's at Culver one day, and it was in April. He's just asleep in his bed, And all of a sudden, he wakes up with this horrific pain in his side. He fell out of bed and he was screaming in pain. It was horrible. So they came in, they took him to the infirmary. They got a white blood cell count, and they said, this guy is having appendicitis. We're going to have to operate in the morning. Let's call the doctor. He's in the infirmary in this awful pain, and he looks out the window and he sees his Uncle Ed walking toward him. And he's like, well, what is my Uncle Ed, who lives in Ohio, doing in Indiana early in the morning? Like, how does he know this is happening to me? So Uncle Ed comes in and he says, I'm really sorry to inform you that your sister Loretta was killed in a car accident last night at 2 a.m. And that was the exact time that the pain started up. And not only that, after he got that message, his white blood cell count, everything returned to normal, and he was totally fine.
Oh, wow.
Is that the weirdest story? It was corroborated by all these people that were there. It really happened, and he was totally fine. He didn't have any appendicitis. And actually, I was maybe 10 when he actually had an appendicitis, and it came out. So that was 40 years later. Maybe we have connections to other people, and we know when something's happening to them.
Was he close to Loretta?
Yeah, that was his closest sibling.
We have definitely heard stories like that as well. Just feeling a pain or something of that nature, or just a strong feeling when somebody passes away. So it felt like appendicitis. She was in a car accident. Did she get hit in the pelvis or something?
Oh, that's an interesting idea. The newspaper article said that the car was completely demolished, that she was thrown through the windshield. And the death certificate said broken legs and broken arms. And so, I mean, I think it was a total disaster. And back in the day, they didn't know about drunk driving, or they didn't pay as much attention. Her date was drunk, and he lived. I can't imagine what it was like to be him.
That's true. Hopefully he sobered up and
learned a lesson. I don't know why it was appendicitis that he would feel.
Maybe if he was going to have a burst appendix later on in life, it was just an easy point to put sensation through or something.
Oh, maybe.
Because like a lot of people go their whole lives without ever having appendicitis.
Right. Right. Yeah.
They probably didn't have the ability to do any sort of ultrasounds or x-rays or anything on his abdomen to determine that it was appendicitis for sure.
No, all they did was they did a blood test, apparently, and his white blood cell count was very high. They knew that. And then they tested it again, and it had gone back to normal.
So they just sort of inferred that it was appendicitis.
Yeah, from where the pain was coming from.
Diana, you have a lot of biological knowledge. If the body thinks that it's sick, even if it's not, could it start producing a bunch of white blood cells?
Well, I mean, that's how the immune system works, right? It's just a feeling that your immune system gets. It starts reacting to whatever. And I mean, that's why allergies exist, right? Because the immune system gets confused and says, pollen must kill. So why not? It could possibly be, haunting must kill. I don't know. You can have an autoimmune reaction to death. I have no reason to believe you shouldn't.
It's interesting to think about, like, if you believe something, can you also create an outcome? The example I would think of, my great-grandmother, she believed that, there's another Irish Catholic belief, that if you died on Saturday, you would go straight to heaven. Her name was Delia, and it was like 1957. She was 90, and she lived at the top of these very steep staircase in my grandparents' house. And she fell down. She snagged her rosary on the banister, and she fell down the stairs. They took her to the hospital. My grandparents were in Florida, and my dad was there. And she said to my dad, "What day is it?" And he said, "It's Tuesday." Apparently, she was awake in bed in the hospital. And she said, "Well, tell Mary and Frank," that was my grandparents, "not to hurry back from Florida because I won't die till Saturday." Because I have to get straight into heaven. I've been praying for like 90 years. And then she died on Saturday.
Oh my goodness.
But I think, like, for me, who's no longer Catholic, now I'm like, okay, she believed that so strongly. She was like, I am getting in. Life has been really hard.
Yeah, she manifested that plan. That's great.
What other Irish superstitions were passed down to you that you heard about through your family?
Because they lost so many people, they had all of these stories. And I think that's why I'm so invested in story. I feel like a story can lift you out of terrible situations or allow you to make sense of things that don't make sense. So they always had a story to accompany any sort of tragedy, like the lesson learned from the tragedy. So it wasn't always a ghost story, but there's always a lesson. My great-grandfather came over from Ireland, and he went to Cleveland. He was living in Cleveland, married my great-grandmother, the one who fell down the stairs years later. And he got on a streetcar. He was going to the bar. After his lodge meeting, he was a mill worker, and they had a big lodge meeting. And so they headed over to the bar across the flats, and he was on the Central Viaduct streetcar. It was a foggy night in November of 1895, and they had these, instead of a drawbridge lifting up, this drawbridge that he was on went to the side. So they were starting to cross the bridge. It was super foggy. They couldn't see where they were going. And the conductor got off to give the signal to cross and apparently got the okay. But the drawbridge was open. No one could see. So they all went over. There were 17 people on board. It was the largest transportation accident of the time. I don't know if it was in Cleveland or Ohio, but it was big. It was like a huge story at the time. He was on there, and my cousin, Patrick Looney. So here's the lesson. So the lesson was, he falls. They all got insurance claims. So it depended on how many people you left behind. So he left behind my great-grandmother and 2 children. So the streetcar company gave her $10,000 in 1895, which she put in the bank. She went back to working as an upstairs maid. And when my grandmother got married in 1919, she gave her husband the $10,000 to start the car dealership. And that propelled the whole family out of poverty.
Oh, wow.
So the lesson there was like, it may seem like a tragedy, but we would still be working in the laundry, or I'd still be a maid if this hadn't happened. Nobody would have gone to college, et cetera, et cetera. And the weird thing about that, too, was they were the 2 Irish passengers, my great-grandfather and his cousin. I find all of this stuff about everybody else who died. Everybody went to their funerals, and there was a big to-do, but no word about, because back in the day, the Irish were kind of looked down on. And so what happened to his cousin, I thought he just died or was an invalid or whatever. He lived. He lived. He went back to Ireland with his $6,000 because he didn't have any kids at the time, bought like tons of acreage. And I just talked to, he had 13 kids.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so I just got back in contact with his grandchildren. There were 10 of them in this one family. Yeah. So it's kind of cool. So that's how the Irish look at everything, or at least in my family. It's like, okay, how can we spin this so we can all survive it?
This cousin of your great-grandfather's plunged into these freezing cold waters.
Yes.
In Lake Erie.
And lived. The one survivor, they're all weeping, hysterical. Everybody goes over to the morgue, and the news for everyone was terrible. But apparently this guy, Patrick, his family showed up, and there's wailing, and his mother's wailing and whatever. And she hears this voice, and he's like, "Ma, I'm over here." And he was just like sitting in a corner. He's like, "I'm alive."
Oh, wow. That is amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. And he was fine. He didn't lose anything to frostbite.
He wasn't even an invalid, which I had been led to believe. He bought a huge farm and had a great life and tons of kids.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
So I have a question for you guys. So in all the stories that you've heard, this is sort of a research question for something I'm working on. Did you ever get any information from anyone about, are ghosts always in recognizable form, or do they get to come back in different forms?
A lot of times they can choose their forms.
They can.
From what we've heard. Yeah. One story that stands out in my mind was a woman who moved into a house that was haunted by the former owner, who was upset. She moved in with her sister, who was in this really bad relationship. And the fiance was there as well. And they were just constantly fighting. And the woman appeared as this horrible monster. And would like creep in and like bend over them like, ah!
Just to get them out. Just to get them.
Yeah. Yeah. And then she warned the new owners about the haunting, when they sold the house, and they were like, oh, it's okay. And then she called him a few weeks later and she's like, how's everything going? She's like, oh, the old lady ghost is delightful. She reads stories to the kids. We love her. I don't know what you're talking about with the monster.
That is so great. Oh my God. She was just like, get out of my house. You are ruining.
Yeah. Yes.
That is so wild. I love that story.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. I was just wondering, like, could you be talking to them and you wouldn't recognize them? Or, yeah.
I feel like that's a common theme. Yeah, because another person who is a medium told us that there's no such thing as child ghosts, that if you see a child ghost, it is something else presenting as a child because that's how it feels most comfortable, or presenting as a child to fool you into thinking they are a child and more innocent than they are.
Oh, interesting. Because children go
to heaven immediately and don't stick around. They don't get their 6 weeks, I guess, but they need to earn that PTO.
They don't want it.
Yeah. Now, again, these are all theories and they vary from person to person.
Right, but it's kind of fun to hear what people think.
Yeah.
One question I had was from the first story you told us where you were listening and heard the voice telling you that Creighton was dead or on the other side. Do you think your dad having a similar experience, do you think it's something special about your lineage that you pass down some kind of a gift? Or do you think this is just something that happens when people are very, very close to each other?
I don't know. I think in both instances, it was because the loss would have been so devastating that the person might not have been able to go on. For instance, having already lost his little sister to rheumatic fever, to lose another one without some sort of sign that she was still there and still connected to him, I think that would have been too much. I did have, this is kind of weird, but my parents were very busy growing up, and I had a babysitter who I was extremely close to who actually lived with us. And she lived with us until I was 13, and I was talking to her on the phone in college, and I just was like, she's dying. So then I called my parents and I said, Olga's dying. I think you got to call over there. I don't know, she's dying. And my parents were like, I think her family would take her to the hospital if she was dying or whatever. And she did. She went to the hospital 2 days later and she died. But I don't think I have a gift or anything. I just think that there are very few people in your lifetime who you're really connected with on a soul level. And she really raised me, and we were alone together most of my first 13 years. So I felt like that was a soul connection. I don't think I have a gift.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us today and telling your stories and helping us dip our toes into some Irish folklore and your very fascinating and, I would say, uplifting stories.
Oh, thank you.
I thought those were very warm, fuzzy feeling types of stories, which is a little different from what we usually have on the show, but we love it. It gives people an interesting way to approach what happens beyond. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Tell us one more time where people can find your podcast.
It's www.kellyfordon.com. Then you can click to Let's Deconstruct a Story, or you can find it anywhere you get your podcasts.
Awesome. Wonderful. So if you're listening to this episode, you can just go in your app and go subscribe to Let's Deconstruct a Story.
And if you're not listening to the episode, what are you even doing here? Pay attention. We've got stuff to say.
Thanks for pointing out my speech patterns, Diana. Maybe you're in your 6-week window.
Yeah, exactly.
Kelly, thank you so much. This has been a joy to talk to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Painted Loves, what do you think? Have you ever heard a message from beyond? Do you plan on taking your full 6 weeks of haunting leave before going to the next level? Let us know and have a spooky day.
Homespun Haints is hosted by Becky Kielimnik and Diana Doty, and produced by Homespun Haints Media LLC. Editing by Becky Kielimnik. Show notes by Diana Doty. If you have a ghost story and you'd like to be considered as a guest for this podcast, please visit our website at homespunhaints.com/submit.